That's my whole vibe from now on.
Nice.
Great. So I think
we're good to go. Good to go.
So we'll get cracking. So welcome everyone to Tech for Good Talks, chatting about impact. So thanks so much for joining us. We're going to just quickly run you through what the plan is for today, and then we will kick start. So we're going to start with some introductions, introduce ourselves, and then we're going to be doing a little bit of a chat about why impact is so important to us. And then we've got some of our wonderful team from Cube on the call with us, who will be chatting a bit about our approach to impact and how we make sure we keep impact at the heart of the projects we work on. And then we've got some other fabulous experts. We've got Michael and Emily on the call with us today. We're going to be going to them and chatting about all things impact and really understanding what it's like for them as two individuals that work heavily in the impact sector. And then we'll be opening up for questions. So just a reminder right at the start that if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat facility as we go through. We will be leaving some time at the end to get those questions answered, and all of our guests will be staying on the call at the end to get those answered for you. So before we commence, quick introductions. I'm Gabby and I head up commercial here at Three-Sided Cube. And I'm Rich, I'm the MD here at Three-Sided Cube. Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, Three-Sided Cube, we are a software development agency. We're based in the south coast of England in a place called Bournemouth. Not so sunny today, but usually very sunny. And we're a mission-led organisation, and our mission is to change millions of lives for the better. We do that by building tech for good, because technology is a super powerful tool with the potential for huge impact and reach, but the technology itself is agnostic. So the technology doesn't care if it's used for good or for bad. So we actively choose to work with clients that are aligned with our mission, that have the knowledge, the expertise, and the audiences to build software that can be a really key part in driving for that impact and having a real positive impact on people's lives. So I'm going to hand over to Rich now. He's going to tell you a bit more about why that impact is so important to us.
Thank you, Gabby. So as Gabby said, our stated mission is to change millions of people's lives for the better. And that's something we've been doing now for kind of 8 or 9 years, quite happily sort of trucking along, working with some of the world's big NGOs and INGOs, and also some smaller kind of organizations as well. And we've always been quite happy to kind of work with those guys, knowing that they're in the for good space. But when we started to look at what that actual mission says, so it's changing millions of people's lives for the better. When we came up with that, the idea was that we wanted to have a lofty ambition. We wanted a big thing that we wanted to go for. And we do manage to do it. And we knew by some kind of quite core statistics, such as the amount of users we've got of our applications, that we were kind of changing millions of, we were impacting millions of people. But we've been on a real kind of journey over the last, probably the last sort of 3 years, I'd say, to really understand what that impact looks like. What does impact really mean? It can't just mean they've downloaded the app. That's not good enough. Because we've all downloaded apps that we've not used. You wouldn't say they've had a big impact on your life necessarily. Nope. So we were really keen to try to get some data around what that kind of impact really looks like. And the two guys that you're going to be hearing from in a little while, Emma and Greg, have had a real focus on that to help us to architect that solution and work out what that really looks like. So impact itself, why is it important? Well, we know it's important from some of the projects that we've worked on, because it's the piece in the puzzle that makes all the difference to the user experience. So if you take one of our more successful applications, so our blood donor app that we do with the American Red Cross, it's got loads and loads of users. We've had about 2 million appointments booked this year already. Just about to tick over 8 million points. It's got loads of big numbers associated to it. And what we know from that big data set is what it is that drives users to book another appointment. Yeah. So there's a couple of different pieces we've pulled out here. One is the blood journey. So the blood journey is something we give to a user. So you go onto the app, you book your appointment to donate blood. You go along to your appointment, you donate your blood, you get your biscuit, and you go home, and everyone's happy. And that traditionally is where that kind of journey ended. What we do with the blood donor app is we then show you the stages that the blood is going through. So you've made your donation, then we show you when it's in for processing, show you when it's being tested, show you when it's being stored, and the absolute key one is we show you when it's been used. Yeah. And it says, thank you, you've helped impact up to 3 people's lives. So each donation, you can potentially save 3 different people's lives. That message there, which is something we push to the user, they go onto the app and see, that is the single biggest driver for rebooking an appointment. And that's the point of impact that makes people understand what they've done, gives them that warm, fuzzy feeling inside, and drives them to book again. So it's a really kind of key driver of all of the great UX and creative and all of the marketing that goes into that application. That key message there is the absolute gold dust, and it's the bit that shows the impact of what they've done. So it's a real proof that impact changes the way people behave. If you can understand the impact you're having, it's really, really important. Similarly, we've got a Teams part of the app, and the idea of this, it's one of the techniques we use, another gamification technique. We group people together in teams. This is the Denver Broncos. There's 2.6 thousand members of the Denver Broncos blood team, and they have impacted 114,000 lives. And that's a real driver for being part of that team. Yeah. If you're part of a team, you can show increased impact. And it's, again, a big driver for rebooking appointments. So we know through the work we've done with blood and the success it's had, that these small techniques that show the impact make all the difference. A lot of the other parts of the app, and the design and UX guys won't thank me for saying for it, but there's a general expected level of how easy it is to use and all that kind of stuff. And that's all really important and it's brilliant. But these little points where you show the impact you can have make all the difference to the actual output. So impact's really key. Another example we've got, which kind of, again, really highlights the importance of impact to any organization, is TerraMatch. So don't know if you can particularly see this, but TerraMatch is a platform that we use with the World Resource Institute. And this matches projects out in forests, so restoration projects. So you might be planting, a couple of hectares of mahogany, and you need somebody to fund that project. Then you have people on the other side, corporates like MasterCard or a bank or whoever it would be. They're looking to fund those projects. And what TerraMatch does is brings the two together. Yeah. Tinder for Trees is kind of...
internal name, I will add. We're bringing you into the Cube family there.
So Tinder for Trees works really well. But what's recently become really apparent on the platform is the importance that those guys put behind the impact that their project's going to have. So actually, for the corporate who's sat somewhere in London or Manhattan or wherever behind a desk, what they're interested in is the numbers and the impact they can put from a project into any output they can have. You can do the pitch about how wonderful the trees are and how important they are and how great it is for the local community and stuff like that. That's all great and it matters, but what really matters is those numbers. How much carbon are we taking out of the atmosphere? How much funding are we getting for this? So we've recently pivoted the platform to have a large monitoring piece in it. And what it actually does is it will monitor any project and show the impact that project's having. And this is bringing in a whole new branch of funders onto the platform to help develop it.
Amazing.
So impact is really, really driving the uptick of this as well. So it's just a couple of examples we've used, and this isn't necessarily about a corporate impact or anything like that, but just to show if you can show the impact that any endeavor has, you're much more likely to get buy-in for it. And I think that's why we think it's so key.
Buy-in and engagement. And certainly that seems like a perfect point to introduce you to two of our wonderful team members, Greg and Emma, who are kind of the team behind some of this amazing thinking and the team that dive into this impact, not only in terms of working out how the users are going to get that impact as Rich has kind of mentioned, but also keeping it super, super at the heart of everything we do at Cube, and also what our clients are striving for in those missions. So guys, over to you, really.
Right. Hi, everybody. So I am Emma, as Gabby mentioned, so I head up the strategy team here at Cube, and I'd like to introduce my fellow friend here.
Hi there, I'm Greg. I'm UX here at Three-Sided Cube.
So yeah, Greg and I basically work really closely together, and actually the UX team and the strategy team really work closely here at Cube to ensure, as Gabby mentioned, that impact and KPIs at the heart of what we do internally, externally, and like for the users as well. So why are we here today? So we want to talk about how at Three-Sided Cube and how we keep impact at the heart of what we do, and then follow on to how you guys can also keep impact at the heart of what you do. So with that in mind, Greg and I wanted to share a little journey that we've been on over the last couple of months to make sure that we're really ringing truth to this statement and working out how we best track impact as Three-Sided Cube as an organisation. So what better way to do that than run our own tried and tested workshops to define how we're going to do this?
Yeah, so usually any of our workshops here will start with us coming up with a problem statement or a North Star statement. And we really like this how might we format. So it implies there's a solution, no matter how hard the problem is. And it does that without telling you what it is and offers you a chance to answer it in any number of ways. So we always like to start, figuring out what we want to do with one of these statements.
And what's really important with this particular North Star statement was not only how we can measure and impact it for our clients and external parties, but also how we could do it for our teams internally to really put impact at the heart of our agency.
So with a problem statement in hand, we ran a few of our internal workshops. These are kind of like design sprint workshops. We first started looking at how people in other organizations are measuring impact, how they're displaying it. And then once we'd kind of inspired everyone with the art of the possible and how we can measure and share impact, we started doing our own sketching and exploring, different ways that we could answer that statement. And we had all sorts of things in our Crazy Eight workshop.
And what's really important to add here is that we involve the whole team at Three-Sided Cube. So it's not only just myself and Greg from strategy and UX who do these workshops, but we involve project management, creative, and even development to really inspire the teams internally to how we might get to basically a solution for this North Star statement, but also inspire them to come up with those ideas as well. And it just helps build that passion and in the heart of like Three-Sided Cube.
So yeah, we based on that, we explored a few little key lessons here basically on how you can apply some of the stuff that we explored to your business and to your teams.
And we also took what we learned from these workshops to understand how we can improve our processes internally as well, to make sure that impact was considered at every single part of the journey when we're starting a project. But what we would like to share with you now, and what the team really came up with some really great statements in terms of how we could keep impact as a heart. So we've got about 5 or 6 top tips that we want to go through with you now.
Yep.
Okay, sorry. Cool. So the first one is you can't improve what you don't measure. And I'm probably like preaching to the choir right now. If you don't get those analytics set up, if you don't work out exactly what you're looking to measure from an impact point of view, then you're not going to end up with any KPIs whatsoever. So we need to make sure that, products are continuously improved to meet user needs and business objectives. And that's why it's so important to have those measurements in place right from the word go, so they can be considered at every single step of the journey.
And I think it's really key to make sure that, you agree all of those like key metrics with stakeholders and teams so that everyone knows the key numbers that they need to be aware of. And better yet, if you can try and distill it down to one number for the project that people should care about and optimize for, that's a great step. People will it's really easy for people to like blow on and just focus on that one number.
And at Cube, the way we do this to try and bring all the key stakeholders into the same place at the same time is doing it right at the beginning of a project in our Discover and Define. So basically, we have a great workshop as part of that that's making sure, like, basically, what are your key measures of success? And then once we've agreed that in that workshop, we use it as the golden thread throughout the whole project, when the project is live and onwards, to make sure that we're all striving back to that #1 impact goal that we're looking for.
So the other aspect is that, you may be measuring it, but if you don't share it, you're not going to have the reach that you want. And we found that this is really key, is like, start sharing it to anyone that will listen, and, really focus on inspiring your clients, prospective clients, your internal teams and stakeholders.
And I think a key point to this one is making sure you really understand what the output needs to be for those users as well. Because it's all well and good sending them a report, but if you're not showcasing the data in the right way and the right format that those stakeholders need, then it's going to not be as visible as you want it to be. So make sure it's being shared in a format that is relevant to the user group that you're sharing it with. So this one is quite a favorite of mine, because I see employees as the biggest cheerleaders for anything when it comes to impact. So the way to get, impact right at the heart of your organization is to make sure that you get your employees on board with it from day one. So we've been looking here at Cube at ways we can, like, put some gamification into onboarding new cubes, to showcasing what our impact is, or guess which app has had this much impact, to really get them on board of how important impact is to our organization and then how they can take it forward. We've also then found ways that internally we can share that impact so that we can make sure it's constantly talked about. And we love talking about stats here, don't we, Greg? So one of the ideas we had was implementing a Slack bot in our Slack channels, which allows our employees to see all the stats across all of our projects appear, so they all know what's going on.
So this leads on nicely to, you've got to treat this as a feature. It's not something that it needs to be given the importance it deserves. Basically, discuss how you're going to track, how you're going to implement it, and test that your tracking and your metrics are working, like any other thing that you do in your product or service.
I mean, I've worked in projects years and years ago where I know we got to an end of it and we're like, oh, we need to add analytics. And you just forget how important it is to make sure the right events are set up to track the right KPI so you can get those reports out the back of it. So yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be a feature, not an afterthought. So yeah, this is one that Strax touched upon earlier, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, so, it's treat it like a feature, and if you can, make it a feature for your users. So we're not going to harp on this one, but Strachan talked about how the blood donor app, it shares with you the impact that you've had as a user. So if you can share with your clients or with your users what impact they're having, you're going to drive more adoption, you're going to drive more engagement.
Okay. So the next one is around not all numbers are equal. So make sure you do tailor your reports to your stakeholders. And this applies to both the numbers that they will care about as well as how you present it. So I touched a little bit upon this earlier on about how you visualize that data, but just make sure in terms of who needs to see those numbers, that it actually is the correct number for the correct organizations. Rich also touched upon this a little bit earlier on with the World Restoration Terror Match, and how the monitoring is important for like the funders versus what's important to the actual project owners. So it's making sure that data is relevant to the right parties as well. And then finally, again, one of the ones that is super important for me is don't ever be afraid to evolve those metrics. Don't ever be afraid to, evolve what impact you're tracking. Business priorities change, so do your KPIs, and, users, we've seen how users are probably adapted in the COVID world, like users' needs change as well. So if metrics don't make sense anymore, change them. Every time we look to do any continuous improvement across any of our apps, we always make sure that we refer back to those golden threads, those golden KPIs. So is this still right for us? And is this still going to show the impact that we want to show? So we've got a really great example now of a client that we've gone through with that. So let us just talk through that now.
So the American Red Cross is one of our key clients here. And the emergency alerting apps have always been like quite focused for us. And the KPI for them has always been focused around the alerts that people receive. And we're obviously super proud of, every year we're sending out more and more alerts to alert people of natural disasters. But the key here really is the Red Cross has realized that for every dollar they spend getting people prepared for disasters means several more dollars saved not having to rescue people after a disaster. So we're actually changing the KPI for the Red Cross hazard alerting apps to be more focused around the engagement with preparedness content and how prepared our app users feel for disasters, rather than just focusing on the amount of alerts that people receive.
So going through this process at the moment, that we're looking at if we're looking at the key metrics to be all around how we make users more prepared, everything we now recommend from a feature perspective and implementation perspective needs to be more focused around that KPI versus the alerts KPI. So now what we'll be doing is making sure that any features that are recommended, basically we're striving towards hitting those new KPI metrics. And that's it from us. So thank you for listening. And I hope those some of those top tips help you guys, but we'll be free for some questions at the end.
Thank you. Thanks so much, guys. I think, that was incredible just to get a sense not only of how we work at Cube, but kind of how you've been adapting, evolving, and looking outside to constantly be questioning, are we doing the right thing, and how are we keeping impact at the heart? So that was incredible. And hopefully everybody has got some really great top tips there. I know I've thought of some new ones as well. So that's amazing. Thanks, guys, for sharing that. Now, I have got some wonderful more experts for you guys. So, the gift that keeps on giving. I'm going to get you introduced to our panelists that are on the screen right now. Just a quick reminder at this point that, as Emma just said, we are going to be opening up for questions at the end, and great to hear Greg and Emma are going to be staying on the call, and also our wonderful panelists in front of you will be as well. So please do begin to pop those questions in the chat facility. We'll make sure we leave enough time at the end to get those answered for you. So without further ado, I'm going to get you all introduced to our wonderful panelists. So Emily, I'm going to kick off with you. Could you please introduce yourself to everyone and tell us a little bit about your role?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I am Em and I work at Twinkle Hive. So Twinkle Hive is the business accelerator connected to the digital educational publisher Twinkle. We're a edtech company based in Sheffield, established in 2010, and we have around 1,000 team members. We operate in over 200 countries and nations, and we have over 1 million signups from educators, parents, and other users who we support. So we are in ourselves a tech for good company. But in 2019, our CEO and co-founder, John, decided to set up Twinkle Hive, which is the area of Twinkle I work in, as our investment arm. So we started out investing initially just in edtech companies that amplified and aligned with Twinkle's mission to help those who teach. But since then, we have diversified the sorts of companies that we're interested in. We now say that we invest in that kind of companies under that tech for good umbrella. So companies delivering a great social mission through the use of innovative technology. We invest cash of up to £1 million and services from Twinkle teams into those companies that are achieving great social missions and delivering real impact. So we've invested in 16 companies over the around 18 months since we started, all companies that have impact right at the very center. And we invest in a really kind of flexible model. Our ethos here is to support founders as they deliver their mission they set out to originally. So one of our founding aims was to get away a little bit from the way that startup investment can happen, which is absolutely all about the revenue. It's all about the return on investment. And it does mean that impact motivated founders are sometimes, through all the jumping through hoops they have to do, they're separated a little bit from that initial mission they sent out to. So we're there to make sure that companies can stay closely aligned with those missions and support them on their way. And I help to manage Twinkle Hive. So I give founders strategic support, and I support founders through their kind of whole time with us, from first applying until beyond.
Yeah.
So that's me.
No, we love that. We love what Twinkle Hive do, you know, in terms of the projects we get for us. Like, it's so important that there's an investment arm out there that sees past some of those things that you've said, including just revenue, and looks at actually the wider impact that people can achieve, and kind of needing that initial support, not just financially, but strategically. It is super amazing what you do. So thank you so much for joining us. Michael, would you be able to do a little introduction for us as well?
Certainly. That's the first time I've ever been described as the gift that just keeps giving. So that's an excellent start to the session. So yeah, hi everyone. Mike Groves, I'm the founder and chief executive of Topolytics, but more of that in a second. About 25 years ago, somebody asked me what I wanted to do, you know, what sort of job do you want to do? And I said, you know, I'd quite like to work in environmental management, because, you know, I'd really like to make a sort of positive impact in relation to the environment. And they sort of thought about it for a second, and they sort of leaned over and said, Sonny, I think you should get yourself a proper job. So I don't know, I think things have hopefully moved on a little bit since then. And so I've been ignoring that advice as well. So my company Topolytics, we're a data analytics business, and our big kind of vision, coming back to Richard's point about having that sort of that big thing, is to make the world's waste visible, verifiable, and valuable. So if you think about waste, it's a kind of massive sort of global system of materials kind of movements, but ultimately the outcome for that material on a global basis at the moment is really, really poor. So more than 60% of all of that stuff that we're sort of chucking away is still going into a landfill or a waste dump, or at worst is sort of leaking into the environment. So that, of course, is creating a huge environmental, but also a huge social kind of impact, but also we're just chucking money away. Yeah. So the value that's in that material alone, let alone the value that you can create for those people in that supply chain, is quite significant. So really on that sort of big scale, what we're trying to do is change that overall kind of metric, and actually reducing the amount of material that we're chucking away, and actually recovering more of that material, bringing that back into sort of production systems. And that way, you know, that's the sort of the big impact we're trying to have. But clearly, you know, there are, you know, getting into the sort of the weeds on that in terms of how we do that is another story, but happy to talk that through in the session.
It's incredible. I mean, already you've given us so much in terms of the impact you're both having in your organizations. Before I get into the weeds of it, I should mention that Rich is also on the screen, or Strachan and Strax, as I think Greg and Em kept referring to him, like he answers to most things. So call him whatever you wish. Rich is also joining the panel, so he can give that flavor and continue kind of sharing what we do at Cube, which is obviously, as we've said, impact is a huge part of what we do. So I'm going to kick off, guys, with the first question that kind of follows on really nicely from what Emma and Greg were saying. Is really that key question of how do you keep impact at the heart of your organization? Both of you very much seems like impact is a massive driver for the whole organization. So what's your key kind of takeaway for how you keep impact at the heart? Emily, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. It is similar to what Emma and Greg were saying, but I think surrounding yourself internally and externally with the right people just has to be number one, top of the list. You know, hiring people with culture fit, people that really care about the driving mission that the company is trying to achieve, and people that have experienced or understand the problem and the pain point that you're trying to solve, really, really significant. So in Twinkle, for example, everyone who writes our content and edits our content has teaching experience. So they understand exactly all the problems that teachers go through every day, and they care about it. And so we make sure that we hire people, that not just understand education because they're the best people to write the content, but because they understand why it's so significant that we get our jobs right. And then externally as well, you know, partners, investors, advisors, your board, everyone has to be aligned with that mission. The partnerships we make in Twinkle, we make them in order to provide another great thing for educators. So we partner with charities and other organizations to make educational resources that teachers and children will love. We don't do it to, we don't make revenue generating partnerships where the purpose of them is to just promote both of our brands and make us both generate extra revenue. It's it's making sure that every single thing that you do, every person you interact with, that impact is first and foremost, I'd say, is the number one thing for me.
I think that's really powerful and certainly resonates with what Emma and Greg were saying, but personally, like what we do here at Cube and from my experience, I think it's really powerful. And as you say, that passion, that driver that you get from the team, I think because everyone is here, signed up to that mission, signed up to that driver, as you were saying, you get a real passion and drive behind everything that's achieved. And it's a real team spirit. So I really love that. That's a really key point. So thank you for sharing that. Michael, Topolytics, what's your kind of key point you would say for keeping impact at the heart of everything you guys do?
Well, I completely agree with Emily on that piece about people. I mean, and I think it was touched on earlier, tech for tech's sake is great, but it's people that use it, it's people that are affected by it, it's people that build it. So I think, culture eats strategy for breakfast, doesn't it? So that is absolutely crucial. But we're a data analytics business. So I think coming back to Emma and Greg's point about you can't manage what you can't measure, you need to be able to measure and define the impact and measure also the quality of, understand the quality of the data and the quality of that measurement as well. So again, I think pick up on Emily's point about your knowledge of your domain is really, really crucial, because if you're going to sort of measure something and define, something's better or something's worse, you've got to really understand how bad or how good it is and why it is the way it is. And so, so we have people that have run and built and operated waste management and recycling businesses within our company, because that kind of dictates how some of that data is gathered and processed, but it also kind of dictates some of the challenges around, really working towards a better outcome for that material, because there's some real sort of challenges in that supply chain. So we have to acknowledge that, we have to understand that in order for us to sort of start to sort of move our customers, towards a better position in relation to that material and what happens to it.
No, I think that's really key. That's really insightful. Rich, from your position, I know we've heard from Emma and Greg, who have done a marvelous job of kind of giving a flavour of Cube and everything that impact means to us. But I guess from your point, your vision as MD, like how do you keep impact at the heart of everything we do?
Well, I think it's kind of, it's picking up on what the guys have said, really. It's really important that you have that, you've got to get the right people in that want to make the change and a mission aligned and all the rest of it. That's, that's kind of a given. A big piece of the work that we kicked off with the guys was because we weren't doing a good enough job of socializing the impact we were having and making it a real focus for the teams. And we set the KPIs for the projects. That's something we've been doing for a good few years now, and making sure we've got those really important measures of success for what we do on the projects. Really, really key. And we were good at talking to the clients about that stuff, but not necessarily socializing it all the way through. And that thing you talked about, culture being really, really important. It's not a fire and forget thing. That is a thing you have to work on every single day. It's layers of paint. Internal communications is kind of the hardest part of any sort of management, really doing it effectively. And a really interesting, one of the guys built a little widget for one of our apps. Funny enough, the blood one that I was talking about earlier on. You wrote a little widget for that, Sam, that was just a Slack bot that just published the weekly appointments and just a few stats about that. And it was done as because it actually, he had to do reporting on it, and it was just easier for him. Classic developer, developed his way out of a problem. So he wrote this little thing, but it just grew arms and legs, and everyone used to go mad for it. Every time it went off, everyone was really into it. And oh, look, it's gone up and we're hitting. And everyone knew about it and understood it and focused on those metrics.
Yeah.
So that was a real kind of look that we need that across the board. So working out how you kind of socialize the impact you're having and communicate it effectively internally is really, really kind of key, because we talk about it from the recruitment point of view, and then most of the guys sort of at the sharp end that deal with the clients were hearing about impact all the time and understanding it. But what about the other 70% of people that aren't, you know, they're doing their day-to-day, don't hear about it all the time, and you've got to take them along for the ride as well. It's really kind of important. So I think the internal comms piece is really kind of key for it. Yeah, I think that kind of.
No, I think that's a really fair point. And certainly my experience in the charity sector before was like so many people are so busy doing the good stuff, which we need them to do. But because you're so busy doing the good stuff, you can forget to talk about doing the good stuff and tell people about doing the good stuff. And that's a real, like you say, that's a real powerful thing when it comes to impact, is actually making sure you're telling people the amazing things you're doing, which seems very simple, but seems to get overlooked sometimes because everyone's too busy doing the stuff. So very powerful point. Thank you. So we've got a question here now, which is quite an interesting one, and again builds on some of the stuff that we've been discussing throughout the event, is how do you make sure it's the right kind of impact for users, clients, customers that you're working with, which obviously can vary depending on demographic or user group. So, you know, Michael, in terms of the customers you work with, that must be quite varied. How do you make sure that it's the right kind of impact for the people that you're working with?
Well, again, I think Greg and Emma, you know, gave a really sort of excellent summary of that whole kind of understanding the user journey and understanding the needs of your customers, and then obviously having a process, a sort of productizing process. Yeah. So all that stuff I think applies. So I think absolutely walking in your customer's shoes to a certain extent. You know, you just can't get around that. You know, the laws of physics apply. So really understanding what they want. But I think there's still that element of, you know, experimentation, where throwing things in and trying things and not being afraid if things don't work, you know, and sort of being able to sort of move them on, because actually they might not work in one context, but they might work better in a different context. And so that could be a geographic context, for example. So, you know, again, we're working internationally. And so obviously you've got different customers and different users in different countries, and they have different expectations. And certainly if you think about the waste industry and the waste systems and the way waste is regulated, that varies enormously. So some of those external factors that we would sort of measure impact against, say in a UK context, will be very different in, say, Indonesia or the US, for example. So some basic stuff about actually what is important in those countries, it also is a you know, it sort of drives how you're sort of measuring impact. But overall, we're still trying to keep that big sort of picture in our minds about, well, what ultimately we're trying to do here, whether it's in Asia or Europe or North America or whatever, is actually fundamentally change the dial about what happens to all that material. And then all the rest of it is kind of the detail that you just have to manage if you're sort of building a product and running a product and licensing a product in, you know, in those different markets.
No, I think that's really interesting to hear. And Emily, in terms of Twinkle and Twinkle Hive and how they work, in terms of particularly as you've moved not just from supporting kind of like ed tech projects, but moving to all social good, how do you kind of work with your startups and those kind of key projects to ensure that it's the right kind of impact? What would your advice and your key takeaways be? Yeah,
so I'd say that it's a really big question that comes up a lot of the time, is making sure that you found the right kind of impact for your client, but in a way it's finding the right client that cares enough about the impact you're trying to have. So I think that's something we talk a lot about with our startups, certainly with companies that apply to us that haven't quite figured out yet. You know, they've got an amazing product, an amazing concept that tackles a huge problem. It can be, you know, climate change, homelessness, and often it's not the people who are being most affected by the problem that are the people who are going to be able to pay to solve it. So it's about finding the person who in all of the different interrelated parties can pay to solve that problem. So it's about finding the right client sometimes. One example that springs to mind is we have a company that we've invested in called Champion Health. They are trying to fix, they're trying to improve people's mental health and well-being. At the end of the day, their mission is to change and save lives. And they realized that by getting employers to kind of pay for their platform that supports people's mental health for their employees, then they would be able to find a way that it wouldn't be people who are struggling with their mental health that have to pay to look after it themselves. So I think that it's sometimes about taking on your clients' objectives and making them your own. So Champion Health, when they decided to take on that kind of B2B approach, they realized that the clients' objectives, you know, yes, they care about their company's mental health, of course they do, but they also have other specific problems that they're trying to solve. They have absenteeism, they have people leaving their company after a short amount of time, they have a lack of clear understanding about, you know, what are the well-being issues within their company. And those are the things that they're really driven by. And so Champion Health seeks to attend to those things and prove that their product solves those things, as well as, you know, trying to shoehorn in their product and their own objectives. They take on the client's objectives of their own as well.
I think that's really interesting, and it's certainly something that when we speak about it here, I think particularly when there's multi-stakeholders involved, and often that is just the client and the users, which can have very different objectives. There is a real piece around finding that sweet spot in the middle. Like, what is it that everyone's trying to achieve, and how can we make sure that both of those goals are being achieved? And I think that's been really clear in what you were saying there, Emily, about how your experience of that. Rich, is there anything you want to add at this point from a three-sided cube perspective?
I think it's just a really key point to whether how you make sure you're measuring the right thing, because it is important, because as soon as you start measuring something, that's the thing that gets impacted. What gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets better is an old idiom that people trot out. So it is important to do the right to make sure you're measuring the right stuff. A really simple and wildly infuriating way of doing that is to do the 5 whys. So if there's a reason, if you're looking at a measurement and sort of just asking a question, why are we measuring that? And then you ask it 5 times, like any good 6-year-old child will do, to drive you up the wall. But it's a really good test of, okay, why is it the right thing? Why are we really doing that? Because you get the trite answer, then you get the more thought out answer, and then, you know, then you get the truth, which is usually, well, that's what they used to do, or we've always done that, or the stakeholder said we should do that. So that's a simple technique for doing it, but it's, you know, however you do it, is absolutely key to do it, because you can really go down the wrong route otherwise.
That's really key, like questioning and asking yourself and making sure it's an informed decision, I think is a really key one, and something that feels to be a thread between what everyone said. So thank you. I'm conscious of a few questions coming in, so I might dive into some of those, and then we can always get Emma and Greg involved in those as well. So one of the questions we've got here is, how do you get buy-in for impact? So I think that's a really interesting one, in terms of, like, this, everyone sitting here is from an organization that really does have impact at the heart. And it's been shown through what we've been talking about that it's a real culture within the organization. So how do you get that buy-in from stakeholders and different members of your team? I'm going to start with you, Michael, because you are the gift that keeps on giving. So, you know, can you kick us off with that one, please?
As my mother once said. Yeah, I think the buy-in thing, I don't know that, I mean, I think it depends who you're talking about. If you're talking about employees and others that are working with you and alongside you, I think that just comes back to, you know, what you're trying to achieve and your purpose and your values and then the associated impact. So I think that in the sort of world we're in, where, you know, certainly the world we're in, where I guess we're focused more on, if you like, the environmental impact, if we're thinking about waste, even though clearly there's a whole social kind of issue there as well. People just completely buy into it, because they've suddenly, you know, they've been, you know, they've been inured to the whole waste kind of ocean plastics, and kind of waste has become a thing. So actually, we don't have any problem in motivating people around what we're doing. So from the point of view of those who are working with us and alongside us, so that's not a challenge. Then you then get to the challenge of selling something to a prospective customer, and that then becomes a little bit more of a sort of a game, doesn't it? Because actually you're still going to have a measure of product market fit. That they may have a view themselves that actually we need to take a view on this whole kind of waste and resources and circular economy thing, but they're not quite sure how to address it. Yeah. So in that instance, that's when you've got to be able to sort of put your finger on things and say, well, we can help you to do this, we can help you to achieve that, and it will have this impact and it will have that impact. Then we can measure the quality of that, and we can measure how that plays out over a period of time. So so you've got that sort of big thing, but actually you've got to sort of vary the messaging, have you not, for those different stakeholders based on who they are, what they sort of their interest is, and what they might be expecting from you.
Absolutely. And I think being clear about that as well, having clear messages around what the impact is and basically what the return on investment is in whatever way that is, whether that's return on impact, whatever it is. I think we've seen that quite a lot throughout kind of the different topics that we've been talking about from the different people. Emily, occurs to me with Twinkle being really well established, and then Twinkle Hive coming along and kind of adding that additional investment arm. Was there a kind of process you went on to get buy-in for doing that slightly different kind of impact stuff? Is there anything from your organization's perspective, or is there anything you kind of advise with new kind of endeavors, how to get that buy-in across different stakeholders?
That's interesting. I feel like Twinkle has a great culture of experimenting and trying new things anyway. The investment arm was one idea that stuck and that's done really well, and Twinkle's had absolutely loads of things that have, and some things that were tested out and decided not to be kept going with. I'd say that it's, if you've got a company that's really stuck in its ways, that's done things exactly the same way, that is stagnant to change, and then you try and throw in something brand new like that, then it will be really difficult to get buy-in. But if you're if the attitude is consistently, we'll try out new things, we'll see how it goes, we'll measure it, we'll review it, and if it is doing the thing that we set out to do, then we'll keep going, which is absolutely the way it works in Twinkle. Then trying new things is part and parcel of being a Twinkle team member. And nobody, everyone buys into that, basically, I would say.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you. And in terms of I'll just throw it to Cube and see who shouts. It might be a Greg and Emma kind of one from a client perspective, maybe. I know the kind of organizations that we only work with are the ones that are doing these great things and keeping impact at the heart. But maybe as you transition and you move and you evolve with the KPIs, is there a process you go on to ensure everyone's kept in the loop and kind of bought into the process?
Yes, so I can take it, and I'm sure Rich and Greg will elaborate if we need to. But what we do with all of our projects stuff is that we do have workshops that invites all the stakeholders who are key stakeholders into a room to talk about what does success look like to them as an individual. Because we know sometimes with much bigger organizations, you're having to get buy-in from marketing or commercial or insights, or, there's lots of different team, and insight and impact can be slightly different depending on the team that you're in within an organization. So we like to run workshops that allows everyone to be heard, everyone to understand what success looks like for the different teams, and then work out a united front with each of those to go, okay, if this is what's important to you guys, the thing that seems to be the golden thread out of all of that is this, and get them to agree that as early as possible up front in the process. We also involve our internal teams in that as well, as they're brought into it as well. So I guess my biggest thing there is getting everyone involved as early on as possible who's a key stakeholder, and also just making sure that everyone's bought into it early and taking them on that journey right from the word go in terms of what we set up originally. And then as we go through continuous improvement, bringing them all back together just to make sure we're all still aligned, because it's just making sure that everyone's expectations are met and we're all brought into it together to go through that journey together.
I think an important little caveat as well is when we do these measure of success workshops, one of the things that sometimes comes up is that the user need or the user success measure is different from the business one.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but you should just be aware that, you know, and acknowledge that perhaps the user has a different goal from the business, and that you should probably track them both. And, you know, it's fine for those to diverge a little bit sometimes.
Absolutely. Rich, any words of wisdom, or are the team just smashing it?
Well, they're obviously smashing it. I mean, that's without saying. I mean, the only thing I would add, just with in terms of taking stakeholders, getting buy-in from the stakeholders, if you've got the measurement right, if you've got the impact correct, and it is true impact, that means something and is relevant to people, you don't have to take them on too much of a journey because they're kind of on it. The difficulty bit, as the guys have highlighted, is getting the right one to start with. If you've got that right, later on, it's just all gravy. As long as you're hitting the impact numbers, there's no kind of, you know, there's no downside because you're just proving the relevant impact all the time. People love it.
No, I think that's really key. And so often when we do these events, for anyone that comes to more than one and watches these regularly, we always come back to this point of like collaboration. And I think an interesting add around that has been communication today. So these kind of really key collaboration and communication is a really key one. So very interesting. I like to always have a segue. And on that, we've talked quite a lot about measuring impact, which has been incredible, and keeping that at the heart. But actually, one question that's come through is there any tech to aid measuring impact? So might be just a quick one around the group to kind of see if there's any tech that anyone's using, or any kind of knowledge around any tech that's there to aid measuring impact. So does anybody want to start? I might just like let you choose if you want to join this in case there isn't.
I would just a super quick one, and this actually is probably not quite answering the question, but I think thinking about how you communicate the impact is really, really important, and don't use a tool where people have to go and find it, because people are lazy and they won't. Go back to the example I gave, which is a little Slack integration someone wrote. Whatever tool people use now in a workplace to share thoughts and ideas and that kind of thing, there will be a way of integrating it there and take the impact to the people and show them it. Don't expect them to go and find it. And there's plenty of integrations that are available out there that will do that. That isn't quite what you asked for, but it is key, totally key to it.
Thank you. Would anyone like to answer the question? Oh, Emma.
Sorry, it's actually Emma and Greg are going to do this. Yeah, just following on from that, what like Richard is making sure that you are, you know, everything's from a tracking impact point of view. When you're setting up events, it's very detailed, can be very analytics, and Google Analytics is constantly evolving, for instance, and God knows how sometimes you can find data in it because it is constantly evolving. So we've been doing quite a lot of research recently to what tools can pull that data so you don't have to go swimming for all of those events and those impact stats, and bring it a bit more to the forefront to find it, make it quite easy to like digest, haven't you?
Yeah, so we've been looking at Data Studio. So even if you don't use Google Analytics and you aren't kind of like in that world of like tracking events on an app or a website, Data Studio allows you to pull data from an SQL database, from a spreadsheet, anywhere where you may already have the data. Data Studio allows you to put it into a nice visual format. So, you know, going back to the points we're raising of like, if you have a report that you need to build for a specific stakeholder and they care about X and Y, you can build an automated little report in Data Studio that will, you know, pull that data X and Y and put it in a nice display for you.
So yeah, it's something that we're testing out with our clients at the moment to see how convenient it is for them to be able to see their data. But also, like Rich said earlier, we're also implementing Slack bots into our Slack to pull the data through to our internal teams as well. So then we can make sure that they can visualize the data too.
It's great.
I mean, I think you can look at it from a pure data point of view. So yeah, we use a lot of Jupyter notepads and things like that, sort of data science tools for just kind of running, you know, stuff over our own data, and, you know, sort of we create our own sort of internal kind of views into all that data. But I think you've then got to look at, okay, what customer satisfaction, how are you measuring that as well? So those, those kind of things. And then also thinking about the sort of the wider impact you might be having as a business in terms of, how you might be perceived in your marketplace, how other third parties might be, viewing you or talking about you in that, in that sense. And then clearly, in terms of your own sort of promotional and sort of public relations and kind of marketing activities, obviously measuring that kind of effectiveness as well, isn't there? So there's a whole range of different sort of things that you need to look at in terms of, measuring the impact. And it's not, yes, it's about the data and the core of what you're doing, but clearly there's a whole bunch of other things there as well.
I think that's really interesting. And that kind of sense of like, not one size is going to fit all, but what's really important is understanding what you're measuring, what that impact is, and then also like a really key point about how you're communicating that to the people that need to know, that can really make a difference and show the difference. So I think that's really powerful. I think I could speak to you guys forever, but I'm going to have to wrap things up because conscious of time. But thank you to all of our panelists and guests for joining us today and sharing those valuable insights from your personal experience with everyone today. So thank you so much. And just one last thing for me before I love you and leave you all is just to nudge that our next event will be on the 21st of September at 3 p.m. as normal, and we will be looking at how to pick an agency. So a really interesting one that I come up with quite a lot is lots of organizations, lots of charities, lots of different sectors are always looking at ways of doing tech projects, looking to work with external agencies in lots of different ways, and it's quite a difficult field to navigate. So we're going to be bringing some panelists together and trying to break down those barriers and chat about how to pick an agency. So hope you can join us for that, and thank you again for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.